And we are going to pick up where we left off in the last class with our previous teachers. And if you have your parenting manual, we are in this is lesson 4, and we're covering the 3 most important things that a parent must have. They must be a provider, a teacher, and a disciplinarian. And we are going into detail on what their role as a disciplinarian is. And as we go through tonight's class, just keep in mind that we're teaching teachers, which is all of us right here, how to be able to teach these things to students. So I encourage you to take all the notes you can in your books, write these things down. That way you can use these things whenever you are teaching this yourself. Okay, so on page 30, it was going over the role of a disciplinarian. And it states here that there is both a positive way and a negative way to discipline. Okay, so now let's turn over to the lesson plan, which is LP4B. And we are going to go on to procedure 7. And this is an activity that you would do with your class. It says divide students into 5 groups. Assign a topic from page 4C to each group and instruct them to determine what disciplinary measures they could use to curtail the behaviors they have been assigned. Let them share their ideas with the class. So this is a really great activity that you would do with your students that helps you to see, how they would handle these situations. It's almost like a little evaluation for your class. So if you look over, just right on the next page, we have the activity cutouts. Okay, so you would cut these out ahead of time and then pass these out to your groups. Okay, so we have back talk and rolls eyes when corrected, leaves books, toys on the floor, cries, gets upset when asked to put them away, has a very difficult time settling in for bedtime, constantly gets out of bed, refuses to follow instructions, throws a tantrum and cries, and very oppositional and disobedient in public places, pulls away from adult and runs away. Okay, so those are just some of the scenarios. You could bring more if you would like to. Okay, so once you do that activity with your class and you have them share what they would do in that kind of situation, you're going to move on to procedure 8. And it says, allow students to answer critical thinking questions on page 31. Discuss answers as a class. Remind them that they are responsible for teaching and training their children from a state of total helplessness and dependency to a mature adult who has a positive character and is caring, responsible, and compassionate towards others. Okay, so that's a lot said right there in that sentence. That's a huge responsibility. So go ahead and underline that in your books. And you really, really want to stress that to these parents, that they have one of the greatest jobs there is. They're helping, mold and shape this child's life from someone who is completely helpless to someone who is going to be successful in society today. And you can reference page 11. If we turn over to page 11, it gives the definition of parenting. In the box, it says, parenting is caring or nurturing a child or children by providing for their physical and emotional needs. So that's the definition of parenting. All right, so let's turn over to page 31. And at the top, you can write LP4B. This is procedure 8. And we have right up there in the box a definition for the word discipline. So discipline means train, instruct, correct, develop a pattern of behavior by repeatedly and carefully following certain rules or guidelines. Okay, and the key there is consistency. The only way that we will be able to develop this pattern of behavior within our children is by being consistent with them. So you can make a note there that being consistent is very important. If you tell a child to do something, they're going to expect you to follow through with that. And remember, it's not only about discipline, but also building that trust with our children. They want to be able to trust us. So if you say, okay, if you do this, and this is what's going to occur, they're looking to see if you're going to follow through with what you say. Okay, so when you are consistent and you have developed the right patterns of behavior, then your children will understand what to expect from you. Okay, and yes, some children will test the limits, see how far they can go before you stop them and bring them back in their place. But it goes back to being consistent with them. Okay, so then it gives, we have 5 questions here that as a teacher you would go over these with your class and have a nice discussion with them. And keep in mind that this topic will most likely bring up many different opinions because we all were raised differently, we've witnessed different things, experienced different things, seen our parents do different things, how they handled situations. But by your students, taking the first step to be in your class and to listen to what you have to say, that shows that they want to make improvements. They want to do better. Okay, so they're taking the first step right there. Okay, so we're just going to read through these questions here. The first one is, how were you disciplined as a child, and do you use the same interventions with your child or children? Number 2, are you satisfied with the way you discipline your child or children? Why or why not? 3, if not, in what ways would you like to improve? And when we have the attitude of humility, there's always room, we can admit that there's always room for improvement. And if you turn over to page 14, and that last paragraph at the very bottom, it says, correcting the mistakes we make in our lives, whether in parenting or any other role, takes determination. It also takes setting your mind in advance to find the solution and overcome the problem. Give yourself room to improve and grow as a parent through self-analysis, listening, and learning. And sometimes being in an authoritative position, it might be hard to admit when we are wrong. But we all make mistakes, and we need to learn, how we can improve ourselves. All right, question 4. In what ways is your disciplining style positive? Okay, and like I said, based on how we were raised, the things we were influenced by, everyone has a different approach to these types of situations. It may not always be the right approach, though. So you're getting your students to think, am I handling the situation in the best way possible? And if not, what can I do to do better? And then question 5 is, would you like for your children to imitate your disciplining style with their children someday? Explain why or why not. Okay, so you're really putting these thought-provoking questions out there to get these parents to think. They possibly have never heard these questions before. Okay, so you're opening up that door for them to evaluate themselves and look at disciplining from a different perspective. And once we learn what is right, then we are able to choose to make the right choice. If we aren't taught, then we won't know. Okay, so then at the bottom in that box, we have another definition. So at the top we had discipline, and now we have disciplined. And it says, using self-control to behave in a proper way. And this goes for dealing with any situation. The first thing you have to do is stop and control yourself. Because if you don't control yourself, then the situation isn't going to get any better. You can't force anyone else to make the right choice. You have to start with yourself. All right, so once you do that with your class, you can make a note at the bottom of the page to turn back to LP4B. So we're going to turn back to the lesson plan and look at procedure 9. LP4B procedure 9. It says, read the section entitled To Spank or Not to Spank on pages 32 to 33, and also you can add page 34. Discuss the results of scientific research in regards to spanking young children. Emphasize that there is a morally correct way to spank. Discuss guidelines given for spanking. Encourage students to consider the benefits of spanking appropriately. Okay, and then we want to also add page 35 for the review as well. So adding pages 34 and 35 because they aren't listed in that procedure. All right, so we're going to turn over now to page 32. And at the top, you can write LP4B Procedure 9. And we just write these page numbers at the top just to help us stay on track when we're going through the lesson, and then we know when to turn back to the lesson plan and how to continue on from there. So the question of the day, to spank or not to spank? Controversy over parents spanking their children has grown over the past 20 years. No doubt the opposition stems from a real concern for the well-being of children. News reports reflect the heinous acts of child abuse and negligence that were discussed in Chapter 2. So let's turn over to Chapter 2. You can reference, this is on page 13, and it lists some different forms of abuse. And the last one here that's listed, or the last one on this page, is physical abuse. Could I have a volunteer to read that? Physical abuse? Anyone with a book?
Physical abuse. Childhood physical abuse involves the physical injury or maltreatment of a child, which includes hitting, punching, slapping, kicking, shaking, burning, and other ways of inflicting pain, not giving a child food to eat, denying a child medical attention, and giving a child drugs and alcohol. Physical abuse can have short and long-term psychological, emotional, and physical effects. Short-term effects include physical injury and brain damage. Children may become withdrawn, sad, experience difficulty sleeping and eating, become irritable and aggressive towards their peers or younger siblings, have lack of confidence and self-esteem, and start using alcohol and/or illicit substances. The long-term effects include difficulties forming and maintaining healthy relationships, and a propensity or a tendency to be victimized or abused in future relationships.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that is what can occur. Those are some of the things that can occur if spanking isn't done at the appropriate time and done correctly. And that goes for any kind of discipline as well. If you don't do it correctly, then it can affect the child in a very negative way. Okay, so we're going to go into detail on how it can be done properly. So spanking done correctly can be a positive and moral discipline that is neither harsh, disrespectful, nor abusive. It should not be considered as weak or of no benefit. Studies reveal that spanking, when applied appropriately and in the proper manner, has actually benefited the moral development of children. Read the excerpt from the various articles below to evaluate the value of appropriate spanking. Okay, so we have an article here. It says, according to a recent voter consumer research poll commissioned by the Family Research Council, 76% of more than 1,000 Americans surveyed say that spanking was an effective form of discipline in their home when they were children. These results are made all the more impressive by the fact that nearly half of those who answered otherwise grew up in homes in which they were never spanked. Taken together, more than 4 out of 5 Americans who were actually spanked by their parents as children say that it was an effective form of discipline. In addition, Americans perceive a lack of discipline to be the biggest problem in public education today, according to a recent Gallup poll. Several studies show strong public support for corporal punishment by parents. Continuing on, it says a study that was reported January 5th of 2010 indicated that young children who are spanked are more stable and developmentally as teenagers. Please read the following excerpt. A U.S.-based study suggests that spanking isn't harmful for children, and in fact, states that children who have been physically disciplined when they were young, between the ages of 2 and 6, grew up to be happier and more successful, perform better at school as teenagers, and were more likely to do volunteer work and to want to go to university than those who had never been spanked. Okay, and I underlined this next paragraph right here because this is a very important statement. Research shows that spanking, when administered appropriately and in the proper manner by parents who practice positive moral traits, such as self-control, respect, and patience, assists in the training of a child's moral development. So proper discipline actually assists the child in developing a positive moral character. Evidence suggests that spanking can be a useful and necessary part of a successful disciplinary plan. Okay, so moving on to page 33, the emphasis is upon what is appropriate and proper when using corporal punishment. Using the moral guidelines suggested below, coupled with consistent positive moral character development, will assure greater success in our most valuable assets and future leaders, our children. Okay, so now we're going to go into the moral guidelines for spanking. Okay, so the first one is spanking should be used for clear, deliberate defiance of a parent's instructions. Okay, so if this child knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing and they choose to do otherwise when they know that it's wrong, then this would be an appropriate form of discipline. And one thing that is really great to do when you're working with children is have them, when you give them an instruction, have them repeat it back to you. That way, there's no doubt in your mind that they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And if you see that they're not doing it, well, you told them and they told you exactly what they're supposed to be doing, so you know that they're just doing it because they're deliberately not following the instruction. Okay, so the second one is spanking should only be used when a child receives at least as much encouragement and praise for positive behavior as correction for problem behavior. Although this may be hard to gauge, the idea is to praise children for their efforts. Avoid dwelling only on the negative behavioral issues. Okay, so once you've corrected the situation, then you want to move on. And this is a great way to teach children how to forgive. Okay, they made a mistake, you've corrected them, you've taught them to apologize when they make a mistake, and then you forgive them and you move on instead of holding on to that and continuously bringing it back up over and over again. Okay, number 3. Milder forms of discipline, such as mercy, compassion, patience, verbal correction, separation, calm down time, time out, and appropriate consequences should be used first. To reiterate, spanking should only be used when rigid, stubborn, rebellious noncompliance persists. Okay, so that's how important it is. That's, they're really trying to stress this point right here. And it's a very important point to stress with your students that it only should be used if this child is deliberately defying the instruction given. Okay, and, they listed many other forms of discipline that also are very effective and that can be used, instead of just spanking the child right away when they do something wrong. Okay, can I have a volunteer who would like to read the fourth one? Okay, in the back.
After 10 months old and up to 18 months old, one can use 2 fingers to firmly slap the hand of a stubborn child with a firm no in order to stop serious misbehavior. When distracting the child from touching an object has failed, a spank on the hand could deter the child from touching the object again. This is especially important with a dangerous movable object like a hot oven or electric outlet.
Thank you. Okay, and 5 goes along with this, with the fourth one as well. It says, after 18 months of age, an open hand is appropriate to spank with. It should be less necessary after 6 years and rarely, if ever, used after 10 years of age. At these ages, there is no resentment towards the parent for such correction because the child generally accepts that he did wrong. Okay, and this is because, the parents are consistent with the child, so the child knows exactly what to expect when they make a wrong choice. And so it is then the child that's choosing. Well, do I want to make the wrong choice and receive the consequence for this? Or am I going to do the right thing and make my parents pleased? Okay, so the next one is number 6. Spanking should never be used on impulse or when a parent is angry, insulted, embarrassed, or lacking self-control. And this is extremely important. I underline that point right there. And this is where spanking can turn into abuse. If it is done out of anger or resentment, the parent is frustrated, they act out on their emotions, how they're feeling, that's where it can turn into physical harm to the child. Okay, so if you are ever in a situation like this, where you're very frustrated with the child is deliberately doing something and you're getting frustrated, it's important that you as the parent or the teacher calm yourself down first. And a really great example you can use whenever you're teaching this to your class is the example of a mother who took her child to the store, and her child was very, very frustrated. And the mother needed to do her shopping, so she took her child in the store, and as they were going through the store, the child was crying and very upset. Okay, so the mother kept saying, "Emma, it's okay, you can do this." And the child would continue to cry, and the mother kept saying, "Emma, it's okay, you can do this." And they got to the checkout, and the child just completely lost it. They were throwing a huge temper tantrum. And so the mother said, "Emma, hold yourself together. We're just about through." And so when they left the store in the parking lot, then a lady approached her and she said, "Well, I want to compliment you on, how patient you were with Emma." And the mother laughed because she said, "The truth of the matter is, I'm Emma." So the whole entire time, she was choosing to talk, say these things out loud that, she was not only saying it to her child where her child could hear, but she was trying to calm herself down in that situation. And she probably was very embarrassed. I'm sure we've all seen a child throw a temper tantrum, in a store before. She probably was extremely embarrassed because everyone was looking at her and stuff, but she chose to do the right thing and remain calm in that situation. And bring to your students' attention, what could occur if the mother chose to act on her emotions, if she chose to hit the child or yell at the child. It would have only made the situation worse. Okay, so moving on to number 7. Spanking should never be a spontaneous reaction on the parent's part, but should be a deliberate reasoned out response that is constant with the specific behavior. Inform the child ahead of time of the spanking if the problem behavior persists. Okay, so they should have been warned about it ahead of time. This is what's going to occur. And if they are receiving a spanking, well, this is why you're getting a spanking. Make sure they know what they did is wrong so there's no question in their mind. Okay, let's turn over to page 34 and look at number 8. Spanking should never cause physical injury, nor should a child ever be hit with a closed hand or fist. Okay, that would be a form of abuse. Number 9, after any form of punishment, it helps to embrace the child and calmly review the offense and the desired behavior in an effort to reestablish a warm relationship. Okay, so you want to forgive and you want to move on from that situation. And remember, correction should be done out of love for that child because you want to help that child grow. So it should never be done out of anger. And, children, they just really want to please their authorities and their parents. So if you let them know, if you do this, brings a smile to my face, this makes me feel really great, then they're going to do those things because they want to see you joyful with them. All right, so we are moving along here. Let's look at page 35. And now that we've covered the role of a provider, a teacher, and a disciplinarian, now you're going to do this following exercise with your class. Okay, so this is almost like what I have learned, only you are opening it up to your students and, really seeing how much they have understood from what you've taught them so far. So putting it all together. So far, you have learned about the qualities of an effective parent. The effective parent fulfills 3 roles: a teacher, provider, and a disciplinarian. You have also learned about the differences between a positive and negative character. So how does a positive moral character affect your ability to become a better, more effective parent? To answer this question, you will need to reconsider the roles of effective parents in connection with character. So we're going to answer the following questions, and you can refer to the list of character traits that are on pages 18 through 19. The positive are on 18, and the negative are on page 19. Okay, so the first question is, and we're going to do these together as a class. Number 1, to fulfill the role of a provider, what positive character traits will you need? Okay, there's a hand in the back.
Two of the most important ones I can think of are educated and responsible as a provider.
Yes, excellent. Yes, educated and, educate yourself in the needs of your child. What does this child need to help them grow healthy and strong, not only physically, but also emotionally? And being responsible, making sure you take those necessary steps to provide those things for your children. Anyone else? Okay, I also have trustworthy. Your children should be able to trust that you as their parent, you as their provider, are going to provide them with the necessary things that they need. They shouldn't have a question in their mind of, whether they're going to be able to eat tomorrow or if they're going to have clothes to wear. You need to provide that for them. And they need to be able to trust that you will always be there for them to provide for them. And another great one is being generous, giving that child the love and attention that they need. And if you have more than one child, making sure that they each get, love and attention. And they need to know that they are very important and they are very valuable. Okay, so question 2. Why is it absolutely necessary to be a great provider? Why is it absolutely necessary to be a great provider? And notice it says a great provider, not just a provider. Okay, you can provide children with, making sure they have food and clothes, but being a great provider, you take that time to make sure they have the proper food, the proper clothes. Yes?
I would think any parent would want what is best for their child. So you would desire to provide them what they really need and go out of your way to even make sacrifices at times to make sure that they get what they need.
That's right. Yes, any great parent wants what is best for their children. And sometimes that, does mean making sacrifices. So your children do get their needs met. So they do get those things provided for them. Okay, and children, they depend on us to do that. Okay, one more comment up here.
Along with that, you're also teaching your child to, in turn, be a great provider. You're teaching that child something to pass on to their own children. And if it's a great thing and it carries forth, then you can see a generation that will be important in society.
Excellent comment. Yes, you're teaching them to be a great provider in return, and they're looking at your example. They're seeing how you're doing different things, and yes, then they are most likely to do the same thing for their children when they grow up. Okay, so before I turn it over to the next teacher, I want you to be thinking of the next question, which is number 3. Which negative character traits could hinder someone's ability to provide for their children? Okay, so with this, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the next teacher.
Okay, so have you been thinking about that question? Okay, we have a hand over here.
I would say uneducated. If you do not have a clue what it takes to be a parent, you're going to suffer along the way, the child is going to suffer along the way, the whole household is going to suffer along the way. We see today with so many children being taken out of their homes due to the lack of understanding what your responsibilities are, and that starts with being educated.
Great.
With that, turn it back to you.
Thank you. Yes, uneducated's a great one. Shout out some other ones. Anybody? Just shout them out. Selfish. Yes, selfish, definitely. What else? Irresponsible. Unreliable. Would not make a great, right. Anybody else? Abusive. Yes. Anyone else? Okay, uncompassionate might be one. Okay, so the next question here we have, to fulfill the role of a teacher to your children, what positive character traits will you need? Shout them out. Patience, yes. What else? Self-control. Compassionate, yes. Humble, you have to be humble, yes. Those are some great ones. Disciplined, merciful, forgiving, generous, thankful. We should be thankful that we actually have a child to teach, right? Okay, and so number 5 is, which negative character traits could hinder your ability to teach your children? Uneducated, yep. Depressed? Aggressive, yes, aggressive, yes. Uncaring, dishonest, yes. And there's a lot of that we see right now in society. Now, the 6th one, what positive character traits would you need to effectively discipline your children? Now remember, going back to discipline, what positive character traits would you need to effectively discipline your children? Self-control, yeah, everybody's like, self-control for sure, right? What about mercy? What about being merciful, right? Patient, forgiving, what about forgiving? Yes. Okay, so now we're going to go to the next page there. And number 7, it says, which negative traits could hinder your ability to effectively discipline your children? Negative. Unforgiving, yes, that's a great one. Kind of all the opposites of what we just gave, right? So that's what you as a teacher would want to really be getting your students. Remember, your students are parents who, a lot of times they come to the class because the CPS has mandated that they come, or they just want to brush up on their parenting skills. So there's many different reasons why they would come to your class. So you have to be ready to be able to show them the proper way to be able to do this disciplining process, because we know that we see in society that there's an improper way where children can actually get hurt. And that's what we want to avoid. We want disciplined children, but we don't want anyone to get hurt. All children deserve love and respect. Is that true? True statement. Okay. So guess what? We're moving on to lesson number 5. So we made it through lesson 4. So lesson number 5, and if everyone would turn to LP 5A, we're going to get started there in LP 5A. And this is, effective parents have self-control. So see, you opened it right up for the next lesson. See all your great answers? You guys write this book? Okay, so we're going to start with, here are the it is on the top here. It says Lesson Plan 5, Effective Parents Have Self-Control. Please take notes because you're going to be referring, as a teacher, you're going to be going back and forth when you teach this class to your students. You're going to be going back and forth a lot to your lesson plan, okay? So the purpose and objective here we're going to start with. It says students will learn that the most important character trait a parent can possess is self-control. And I would have to say, not just a parent, a person, right? That's why it's a foundation of all positive moral behavior. Okay, so they will also learn to identify what triggers them to react negatively and to develop a plan to stop them from doing so. Okay, so they're going to learn to identify what triggers them. I would like everyone to go back. Now, all of you who are in this certification course, you're going to remember that we talked about triggers. Does everybody remember when we talked about triggers? I want to roll you way back to some classes a long time ago. We're going to go to the self-control unit. I'm going to have this on the screen for you, self-control unit, and we're going to be on page 30. And we're going to read. And it says there, what are emotions? Remember that? It's been a long time since we covered this, but emotions are strong physical and mental responses triggered by what we experience. A trigger is something that starts a process. Something that starts a process. Now that's all we're going to cover there. We're going to go back here and we're going to go to the lesson plan and we're going to see why are we talking about triggers. They will also learn to identify what triggers them. You have to know what a trigger is, right? When you're teaching your students. Jump over to, well, you won't have that in your book, but I'm going to put on the screen page 61 from that same intermediate self-control unit that you guys graduated from last summer, I believe. And it says the question of the day, why do we get angry? We often get angry because we experience something that is unpleasant or our expectations were not met. And, think about this in parenting. Everybody wants to have a perfect child, right? And if we had our way, our children would be born right out of the womb, perfected. They would never talk back. They would never roll their eyes. You would never need to discipline them because they would be perfect, right? That doesn't really take place though, right? That's why they're in this. That's why we have this class. That's why we had to write this book, right? So expectations could possibly not be met even when you're a parent, right? People get angry for many reasons. The reasons are called triggers. Triggers. From the previous chapter, you learned that a trigger causes something to occur. An anger trigger could be something that provokes. Has a child ever provoked you? That's what you'd want to ask your students. Has your child ever provoked you? Frustrates or aggravates? Now, I bet if we took a poll of parents and we said, has your child ever caused frustration or aggravation? What would they say? Yes, until they graduate from this class, because then they're going to realize, because we're going to teach them, that nothing can make you frustrated. Nothing can make you angry, right? We're going to teach these parents that no, they're not making you frustrated. You can allow yourself to become frustrated. You can allow the behavior of your children to cause you to become frustrated. But what is that word that I'm looking for? Choice, yes. It's a choice. We choose whether we get angry or whether we don't. So that's very important that we teach our students this, because they don't know. When they join up for these classes, they don't know these things. That's why they're here. We have to teach them that there's a choice. We don't have to discipline the way that our parents disciplined, right? That's what we're teaching. If your parent was one to yell and scream, backhand, whatever they might have done, you can learn different behavior. You don't have to go down that same path. And you can get positive results. Because what we're doing is we're building character in our parents. Because that's what builds character in our children. Who are the first teachers of our children? Their family members, their parents. Okay, so continuing here. So we now know that we're teaching them to identify triggers, what triggers them, to react negatively. Okay, so who remembers on page 129 of the self-control unit, way back, we're going way back, there was an acronym called REACT. Do you remember that? Do any of you remember what that REACT stood for? Does anyone remember one word from one of the letters? Someone here has their hand up in the middle. It's okay if you don't remember everything because I'm going to put it on the screen in a minute, but I want to see what we remember.
I think R is recognize if the influence is positive or negative.
Yes, exactly. That's great. Great memory. Okay, and then in the back, did you remember one? E for examine. So we have, and we can put it on the screen now. So we've got recognize. And remember, it was recognize whether the influence is positive or negative. Examine all the options. Act with positive moral character. Consider the consequences or the benefits, right? And now think parenting here. And then we've got consider. We've got think about making the right choice. And as a parent, when we're disciplining or dealing with our children, we always want to teach the parents to make the right choice, right? Because if they make a wrong choice in parenting, everything's going to go south. We don't want that. Okay, so we're teaching them what triggers them to react negatively and to develop a plan to stop them from doing so, okay? Now, the materials for the lesson, we've got the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program Parenting Manual, which you have in your hands or right in front of you there. Pencils and pens, paper, markers, colored pencils are optional. And that's really great to have your markers and colored pencils because you should be highlighting, and I color code my book. I like to have everything color coded so that I can refer back to everything and know when I'm teaching a class where to go and to put little flashing things in front of my eyes to catch my attention. Okay, so we're going to read Procedure 1. Procedure 1, it says, briefly review Lesson 4, the roles of a parent, by asking the following questions. And guess what? I'm going to ask you these questions, so get ready. A, what are the roles of a parent? Anyone? Teacher, okay, yes. What else? Provider, yes. Disciplinarian, yes, we just covered that this evening. Okay, so I want to refer you to way back to the character unit, intermediate character unit. And we're going to be on page 35 of this. I'm going to put it on the screen here for you. Because I want you to, this could be a little mind-blowing when you think about it, because Peaceful Solution teachers, and I know that I've had this in my own experience teaching the Peaceful Solution, where I've taught someone in the intermediate unit. I taught them, and then they're also in my parenting class years later. Okay? So you're going to have this. So we're going to go back here. And in the middle of this page, on page 35 of the responsibility, we'll start with character unit, page 35. It says, the role of parents and the family in shaping a positive or negative character cannot be overstated. That means it's important, right? It cannot be overstated. It cannot be overstated. And it talks about in this chapter, which we learned already, you will learn that character plays a key role in families. Negative or positive character has the ability to destroy or strengthen a family. So you can either build or destroy, and that is all done in the family unit. That's why it's so important. These parenting classes are so important. Now, in the responsibility unit, we're going to put that on the screen, because I've actually experienced this where I've had a student and I've read this to her, and it says, someday you too might be a parent and will want what's best for your children. In order to understand what your parents and guardians are going through, do a little role reversal. See yourself through your parents' or guardian's eyes, and then consider the dangers of the world that we live in. Now, everyone's going to be a parent someday, probably. It's very unlikely that that won't occur. So then, jumping down to the next paragraph on the responsibility unit, it says, most parents and guardians take their job of parenting very seriously. They want to protect, right, their children from harm or danger. And of course, there are always exceptions to the rules. There are some parents or guardians who are negligent and abusive and do not give proper guidance to their children, but we'll discuss that in the next section. It says, overall, parents and guardians are really not trying to cramp your style. So we have to teach them that, and then eventually one day they actually grow up and they're parents of their own, and they're sitting in the parenting classes because they remember the character education that they received in the intermediate grades. And that is really nice to see. So we see there that the teacher, the provider, the disciplinarian, we see that even when they're young, we've got to get them to see that one day you're going to be the teacher, the provider, and the disciplinarian, right? Don't give your parents such a hard time when you're young, we tell them. And then when they're older, they actually become the parent. And they're a student in your class, and now you're teaching them to give the providing, the teaching, the discipline to their own children, right? So you can see how this goes full circle. So briefly describe each role. What does a teacher do? Somebody said, well, she teaches. Yes, she teaches, she instructs, she guides, right? That's what a teacher does. What about the provider? What role does a provider play? You can shout it out. Their needs, right? Physical and emotional needs. It's not just about what they need physically, but emotionally, right? What about the disciplinarian? Well, we know what they do. We just talked about that. They discipline, right? In a positive way, as we learned. Okay, so number C, letter C there, it says, beside the basic necessities, what other things does a caring parent provide? What other things does a caring parent provide? Education, that's a great one. Anything else? Nurture. Oh, I'm glad somebody said nurturing. Nurturing, and this is something that we really need to, when we're teaching our teachers, they have to really expound on nurturing, because you can't just take a child, if you took a child and you just left them to any influence that came around them and didn't nurture and they didn't feel that love and acceptance from the family, you're going to lose them. You're going to lose them to their peers, negative influences or whatever. But if you can have that nurturing where they actually feel loved and accepted by their parents, then they won't feel bad to come to them and talk to them about things that are bothering them. A lot of times you see where, have you ever heard of the trafficking that's going on? It's really big. There's even commercials about it, to be careful about not getting kidnapped and pulled into trafficking, but they take young people. They actually have people that pretend to be 15, 16-year-old boys, 17-year-old boys. They have fake pictures that they send them. They chat with them on the internet. And when the child goes to meet them, a lot of times it's a pedophile, it could be a murderer. You don't know. You don't know. That's why it's very important to make sure that you have that nurturing, where your child would say, hey, I've kind of been doing something I'm not supposed to do. And you could have that talking with your child. We need to really, really get that across to the teachers to make sure that they tell the parents that, because it's really big right now. It's really big. So protection, love, attention, health, education, moral character. No one said moral character. Moral character, and that's what we're in the character class here. That a child can see and emulate. It's very important that we as the adults are actually doing these things and being positive role models to our children. And so as the teacher of your students, you want to really encourage them in the home not to be cussing, carrying on, doing the gossiping, all the negative behavior traits, because your child is going to pick up on that. And so we as teachers, we need to let them know, if you want that perfect child, it's possible. But you have to become perfect yourself. Because they're going to be looking to you as that role model, right? How many of you didn't look to your own mother as a role model? No hands are up in the auditorium. Of course we look to our mothers. They're our first teachers. We see them, right? D, what is the ultimate goal in parenting children? What's the goal? The ultimate goal. You just have a child just because you want to dress them up and put little bows in their hair if it's a girl. In the back? To build positive character within that child. You want to take a little helpless person and get them to be a grown-up person that can make decisions, positive decisions on their own without you following them around. That's what you want. Got a hand right here? I think they think everybody's shouting, so you can just shout it out.
You want to raise them enough that they can be a positive member that you can put back into society. You want to have an asset to society, and when you raise your children in the right way, then they can be an asset.
You want to bring a positive, productive member of society into society, yes. No, we don't want any thugs, things like that. No, that's not what we want to produce. So yes, you're right. We want positive, moral, little people to grow up into positive, moral, big people that can be productive in our society. Okay, so we're going to move on to procedure 2 here, and it says, tell students that in today's class, they will learn about self-control and its role in parenting. Choose volunteers to read the first 2 paragraphs on page 37. Ask students to brainstorm ways that we fail to practice self-control in our daily lives. List the answers on the board. Emphasize that by analyzing our thoughts and behavior daily, we can learn to make better choices. And you know, in the Peaceful Solution, if you remember back in the intermediate series, almost I know in the self-control book, I think there was like, let's see, let me count them. On page 25, 54, 113, and 150, they had where you can journal. You would journal. I have an example of that. I took it from page 25. I'll put it on the screen here. It says, use the following acronym to, oh no, that's the reactive down here. Enrichment activities. It says, keep a self-controlled journal. Write down the situations you experience and evaluate how well that you practiced your self-control. Write down your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, and how you can improve on practicing self-control. So you're journaling. It's kind of like a journal chart on how you're doing with your self-control. But this is all throughout the book. It's all throughout the book. So we're wanting to tell our parents to keep a journal. Journal your behavior as a parent. Did you lose it with your child? Journal that. How can you do better? Write down next time, you know, I'm gonna do better next time. I'm gonna be on guard. I'm going to make sure that I don't fall into this pitfall. I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna be ready. Okay, so jump over to page 37 because we're gonna read those first 2 paragraphs there. And we're gonna put at the top there, LP5A procedure 2. Like we're in the pattern of doing in the certification course. And it says, lesson 5, effective parents have self-control. One of the most important character traits a person can develop is self-control. Think about it. How can we teach a child to have self-control if we're not practicing it ourselves? Can you do that? No way. If you took your child and taught him how to drive and we're blowing through all the stop signs, and then you say, oh, and you got to follow all the traffic laws. You know, they're going to do what they see you doing. Oh, well, I'm blowing past that stop sign. So it's really important. Think about it. How we teach a child to have self-control. How can we teach a child to have self-control if we're not practicing it ourselves? And you might want to highlight this. Have you ever noticed a parent who is screaming at her child for yelling at her sibling? How many times have I told you to quit yelling at your sister? Well, I can't see where they learned that, right? What about the parent who puts others down by talking bad about them in front of their children? These are only some of the ways that we fail to practice self-control. Second paragraph there, it says, becoming a better parent starts with self-control because it is the foundation of a positive character. Now, any of you that know anything about building a house, I don't see any house builders in the auditorium tonight, but the foundation is like really important when you go to build a house. Like nothing, it's not going to work if you don't have a solid foundation. So it says, it is also one of the hardest traits to develop. So it's not going to be easy, right? So already know that. You're going to tell your students who are parents, you're going to say, okay, it's the character trait that you have to have, it's the most important. But then you're going to tell them it is the hardest one to develop. But the best way to do it is let your child practice on you every day. Right? I mean, is it true? You know, when you have the eye rolling and you have the different things going on, there's where you can get your practice in as you're learning to practice your discipline skills and your self-control, right? So it's the hardest one to develop. Self-control, and you'll want to highlight this here because this is our definition for self-control. And you're going to want to have your students really get this. Self-control is controlling our own. No, we're not out to control everyone else's emotions. We're out to control our own emotions, desires, and actions in order to arrive at a decision that is morally correct. So be mindful and do not just do anything you desire to do. With self-control, you can choose to speak and behave appropriately regardless of the choices that are before you or the situation that you're in, okay? So now we're going to jump over to the lesson plan again, and we're going to read Procedure 3. Procedure 3. It says, paraphrase the next two paragraphs on page 37. Draw their attention to the bullet points about self-control. Emphasize that thoughts lead to feelings, which lead to actions, and actions reflect our true character. Ask students, what are some things that could affect our ability to practice self-control? Let's do that now. What are some things that can affect our ability to practice self-control? I think we got a couple minutes here. What is it? Behavior? Is that what you said? Yes, behavior. Negative behavior. So what about not getting enough sleep at night? I mean, how many of you have ever been short-tempered when you don't get enough sleep? So is it important to teach your students who are the parents to get enough sleep? Adequate rest, sleep, okay, poor diet. What if their diet's bad? They can't think. What about if they have too much stress in their lives? Have you ever seen a very stressed out person take it out on their children? So these are some of the things you need to be looking for. Drug abuse, right? Physical or emotional abuse, negative influences, aggression, watching too much violence on television, and then it comes out when you're dealing with your own children. These are some of the things that we as teachers need to point out, because right now society, they come home from work, they sit in front of a television, most of them don't even eat with their children, and they sit in front of the TV watching all manner of violence on the television. They don't eat together as a family. They probably got TV trays or the food on their lap. They don't interact. How was your day? None of that, right? Okay, so we're going to stop there because we're out of time. But we're going to keep up on this subject. So please tune in next week where we're going to continue to learn about effective parents that use that self-control, okay? So thank you for coming tonight, and we'll take up here next week.